The strange but true story featured on this podcast contains details some people may find distressing. Listener discretion is advised. I'm Chaya Samuel, and things are about to get weird. Hello, my friends. Oh my gosh, I feel like I haven't said my intro in so long. As you may have noticed, I've been away for a little while sorting a few things out behind the scenes. Sometimes, things in life don't run quite as smoothly as we'd like them to, but I massively appreciate your patience and understanding, and I'm very happy to be back with a new episode for you today. Thank you so much for joining me. At the end of this episode, I'm going to be talking a bit more about our schedule going forward, but for now I wanted to get right on into today's story. Now, this is a case that's been on my list for a little while now. It's one that I often find myself thinking about in those quiet moments because there are just so many odd details within this story. This is the tale of the mysterious disappearance of Trevaline Evans, and it's a case that has very much stuck with the community she lived in North Wales for over 3 decades now. It's the town of Llangollen where our story begins. By all accounts, the 16th of June 1990 began as a perfectly normal day for 52-year-old Trevaline Evans. She arrived at the shop she owned, Attic Antiques, which was located on Church Street, and throughout the morning she had various interactions with fellow locals that were nothing out of the ordinary whatsoever. Around 10 a.m, she had popped into a shop owned by a lady named Doreen Dolson to buy some milk, before heading just down the road to her own business premises. Those who spoke with Trevaline that day remember that she was in a happy and relaxed mood, and that she revealed her plans to go out later that evening. At some point during the morning, a close friend of hers named Christine Burdett called into the antique shop, and the two shared a coffee and a chat, with Christine describing Trevaline by saying she was happy, she looked fit, and she had lots of plans of things she was going to do. I even popped back to the shop to remind her that we were invited to a party, and she was thrilled to be going and really wanted to go. This kind of content disposition was something Trevaline's loved ones were very used to. Her brother, Leonard Davies, has recalled that just a week prior to the 16th of June, he had met with his sister and noted that everything had felt good with her. She enjoyed her work as an antiques dealer and owning her own shop, which she'd had for around a year, and he remarked that she was keeping herself quite busy. The overall impression he gave was that Trevaline was living a full and fulfilled life. Now, around lunchtime on this summer's day at about 12:40 p.m, she locked the door to Attic Antiques and placed a note in the window saying, "Back in 2 minutes." With it being just after midday, I imagine that anyone passing by the shop would have assumed that Trevaline had popped out to grab something to eat. 2 local men who were driving past the shop at the time actually saw Trevaline lock the door and begin to walk down the street in the direction of the town centre. But after this, the eyewitness accounts of her movements begin to become a bit less clear-cut. Some sources state that at 1 p.m, she was seen purchasing a couple of pieces of fruit from a nearby shop, whereas a piece on the popular BBC television show Crime Watch from back in 1990 paints a slightly different picture of events. The programme stated that at 2:30 p.m, she was first sighted walking past her home on Market Street, though no one had actually seen her enter or leave the house, so it's unknown whether she had been at home during this interlude, or whether the street she lived on simply happened to be on the route she was walking. It's said that at this time she was walking in the direction of Attic Antiques, but sadly she never arrived back at the shop. Around 5 minutes after this, a woman matching Trevaline's description was seen walking in the opposite direction entirely, along the A5 road heading out of Llangollen. Shortly afterwards, a local woman believed she saw someone resembling the antiques dealer walking on a public footpath near to the River Dee, and as far as we know, These were the last potential sightings of her, but they weren't the last reports of interest from the 16th of June. Just before 6 p.m. that evening, another local woman was driving up Church Street, where Trevaline's shop was located, and saw a man standing outside Attic Antiques. She described him as looking suspicious, which naturally caught her attention, and as she drove past, she observed the scene closely enough that she said she believed the door to the antique shop could have been open, but Trevaline herself was nowhere to be seen. Now, of course, the moment her family realised that something wasn't right that very same evening, they began an urgent search for the 52-year-old. Not only would it have been completely out of character for Trevaline to take off for an extended time without telling anyone where she was going, but to do so on what should have been a busy Saturday at her beloved shop was even more inexplicable. One of their first ports of call was to head to Attic Antiques to see if there were any immediate clues as to where she could have gone, but rather than finding any reassuring items, such as a note explaining her absence, they were met with a puzzling sight. Trevaline's handbag, as well as her makeup compact, were still at her place of work. All of her bank cards were still in the bag, and the compact had been found open, as though she had been using it and had been called away unexpectedly. Some reports state that her jacket was also left in the shop, along with some fresh fruit and flowers that she had been intending to take home with her after work, and it was reported that her car was left nearby too. The door to the shop had also been locked, which was an odd detail given the sighting of the potentially open entrance and the suspicious-looking man who'd been seen at the Attic Antique store earlier in the evening. It was said at the time that Trevaline's husband Richard, who'd been away, returned home after the alarm was raised and officially reported her missing around 11 p.m. that night. In the days, weeks and months after Trevaline disappeared, it seems that almost no stone was left unturned in the search for her. According to North Wales Live, the police spent thousands of hours on the case, taking over 330 statements and going above and beyond to try and find new information about what had happened. It's said that people from every household in Llangollen were interviewed, as well as many from further afield too, and checks were run on over 1,500 people and 700 cars in order to rule them out from any involvement in the incident. As well as making these extensive inquiries, the authorities also carried out searches of the River Dee, as well as caves, mine shafts and a local canal too, but at every turn they were met with nothing. As I mentioned, Trevaline's case was soon featured on an episode of Crime Watch. If you're not familiar with the show, Crime Watch is a television programme here in the UK which focuses on trying to gather new information from the public about different unsolved crimes, and part of an episode in September of 1990 was dedicated to the missing antiques dealer. In the segment, many of the details and chronology I've just laid out for you were presented, as well as several other additional pieces of information which I'll get to shortly. But possibly two of the most important voices we heard were firstly from Detective Superintendent John Cook, who worked on the case, and also from Trevaline's son, who, like his father, was also named Richard. Let's take Detective Superintendent John Cook first. He appeared in the studio at the end of the Crime Watch reconstruction, which showed the possible events of the 16th of June 1990, and in his introduction, it was made clear that the police believed that this was really more of a murder investigation. He was asked about a few of the people featured within the reconstruction, and here we actually head back to a couple of days before Trevaline's disappearance, to the 14th of June. John Cook, along with the presenter Nick Ross, discussed how there were a few people within the reconstruction that they were keen to talk to. Firstly, there were two men who had been spotted outside the shop on this date, the 14th. Who likely had nothing to do with the case but were still of interest to investigators. They described a man aged around 30 wearing a dark suit, and another they believed to be around 65 who had been seen speaking with Trevaline. They also mentioned another man who was seen talking to her the next day on the 15th, who could well have been one of these same two unknown males, who they also seemed keen to identify. Plus, of course, the suspicious-looking man from outside the shop on the evening of the 16th. They were all pinpointed as potentially important puzzle pieces, and people they were eager to either eliminate from their investigation or look into further. Secondly, we come to Trevaline's son, Richard. He's seen at the end of the report just before they throw to the studio, and this is what he said in his interview, quote, "I think anyone could think about their own mother or their own father, and they know sometimes, you can see things brewing up. But there is no way that she would go without saying anything. And we're just desperate to know what happened, whether it be for the worse or for the better, but just to come to some sort of conclusion, because living like this is just terrible." Now, whilst this is heartbreaking to hear from her only child, Richard's words lead us on to an interesting part of this case, which is to do with Trevaline's husband, Richard. So during the week of her disappearance, her husband had actually been away at their holiday cottage, located in the coastal town of Rutland, about an hour's drive away. Richard had been renovating the property, and Trevaline had actually been up there with him until the Wednesday, so the 13th of June, when she returned home to Llangollen alone. I want to be careful here because, as you know, when it comes to true crime tales, I'm not one for speculation around serious matters, but it did strike me as a little unusual that there were so many quotes from the time which described Trevaline as being happily married and having no personal troubles, but there seems to be a slight conflict there with what her son stated in the Crime Watch show, where he insinuated that there was perhaps some tension brewing between his parents. I'm going to put a pin in this point for a moment and come back to it, because it does seem possible that there's more to this angle of the story than first meets the eye. Quite a lot more. But for now, we're actually going to jump significantly forward in time to 2021, because within the past few years, there have been some strange new twists within this tale that I think will be helpful to know in advance of me getting into some of the theories of what could have happened to Trevaline. In early 2021, it was reported that something odd had been found along a popular 2.5-mile walking route that runs from the town of Prestatyn to the village of Duseth, not too far from where the Evans' holiday cottage was located. On one of the benches situated along the trail, a metal plaque had been attached which was engraved with the following text: "In memory of Trevaline Evans, vanished 16th of the 6th, 1990. Found, Rutland, GC, 14th of the 3rd, 2019. Removed 19th of the 3rd, 2019. RIP." Now, at first glance, this would have appeared fairly confusing to most locals who remembered the mysterious case from back in 1990, as to this day it still remains officially unsolved. However, the message isn't entirely cryptic, because in 2019, as the 30th anniversary of the mystery approached, a potential new lead in the case was brought to light. Two brothers from North Wales, Andy and Lee Sutton, claimed that they had come across some new circumstantial evidence which suggested that Trevaline had indeed been murdered, and that her body had been buried beneath the floorboards in the Rutland Golf Club bar, a spot which was obviously situated not too far from Trevaline and Richard's holiday cottage. As far as I can find, there are no details available about where this tip came from, or any of the wider context around it, but Andy and Lee felt it was compelling enough to share with North Wales Police. Now, although they reported what they had heard to the authorities immediately, the brothers didn't leave it at that. They felt so strongly about the information they had been given that they actually approached the golf club directly and asked them for permission to use special underfloor inspection cameras to see if they could spot anything untoward. After carrying out their search, they said that they had found evidence of human remains under the floor, including a skull and bones signs in the formation of a hand. But just a few days later, when the police arrived to conduct their own investigation of the site, they concluded that there were no remains to be found. Despite this, Andy and Lee remain adamant about what they saw and actually lodged a formal complaint against the police, who then referred themselves to the force's watchdog. But nothing came of this referral, it was actually thrown out. The brothers' theory seems to be that in the days between their own investigation of the underfloor area and the police turning up, that the remains must have been removed. But of course, it's impossible to state this as fact. It's purely speculation, as we just don't have the solid evidence. The plaque on the bench was soon removed by the local council, who stated that they have a policy in place to not allow unauthorised tributes, as they can often end up becoming shrines which can cause an obstruction, especially in a public space. This matter didn't end there though. In 2022, another message appeared on a different bench, this time one located on a hillside in Prestatyn, with the inscription reading, "Justice awaits for those responsible for the removal and disposal of Trevaline Evans, in this life or next, from Rithlen Golf Club on March 19, 2019 at noon. May the Lord have mercy upon their soul." This one feels a little bit chilling to me. I wouldn't go as far as to say sinister, but there is a weird feeling to it all. It's important to say that while some suspected that Andy and Lee Sutton could have been behind these signs, the brothers have strongly denied that they had any involvement with the appearance of this new plaque, or the last one, with Lee telling the media, quote, "It's very strange. I don't know who would do it and why they would choose to put it there." Now, when I first ever heard about this story, it was actually the reports about the second plaque popping up that initially drew me in. And my train of thought at the time was that if it wasn't Andy or Lee who were responsible for it, then perhaps it could have been Trevaline's husband or son, eager to keep their wife and mother's unsolved suspected murder in the public eye. However, as I read further into the tale, I discovered that Richard Sr. passed away in 2015, and that tragically, Richard Jr. actually died from a heart attack back in 1999, aged only in his late 30s. So, like so many other elements of Trevaline's case, the incidents of the messages on the benches remain unexplained. But that's not to say that there aren't plenty of theories as to the bigger questions in this mystery. So let's get into some of the key ideas put forward over the years as to who could have been involved with her disappearance and, likely, her death. We're going to loop back to Richard Sr. at this point, because there are several important details in this story which involve Trevaline's husband and touch on the potential state of their relationship. One of the first pieces of information you'd be likely to come across if you look this case up for yourself is that in January of 2001, police actually reopened the case, hoping that advancements in forensic testing techniques might be able to shed some new light on the events of June 1990. And in June of 2001, Richard Sr. was actually arrested and interviewed in connection with the case, but was ultimately released without charge. Now, we don't know what evidence the police had. We don't know why he was arrested or what cause they had to bring him in for questioning, but we can assume that there must have been something that gave them cause to suspect Trevaline's husband. Plus, as was pointed out in a 2023 episode of In the Footsteps of Killers dedicated to the case, featuring Amelia Fox and David Wilson, statistics show that in over 60% of cases where a woman has been murdered in the UK, the perpetrator is either their partner or ex-partner, so it makes logical sense that Richard should have been looked at a little more closely. In this same TV episode, they show an interview with journalist John Schoen, who covered Trevaline's disappearance back in 1990, and he spoke about something I alluded to earlier, the theory that her marriage to Richard was not as solid as was often portrayed at the time. He spoke about there being a huge amount of gossip around Llangollen that Trevaline was unhappy, particularly about the notion of moving out to their holiday cottage on a more permanent basis, and that she had been engaged in at least one, if not multiple, affairs affairs outside of her marriage. John emphasized, however, that it was not believed by anyone who knew Trevaline that she would have gone missing voluntarily, which makes me think that there was no real suggestion that she had simply decided to run off with another man. The evidence showed that she had most likely left very abruptly, leaving her car, handbag, and all of her other possessions behind, rather than it being a planned desertion of her current life. For balance, I did want to mention here that in 2015, before he passed away, Trevaline's brother Leonard spoke out about this and said that he, quote, didn't believe his sister was having an affair that might be linked to her disappearance. As I say though, especially because so much time has now passed, this side of the case really is mostly based in speculation, which makes it very tricky. Could Trevaline have been having affairs? It's possible, but it's difficult to definitively prove how this could fit into a theory about her disappearance. Over the decades, there have been a number of other suspects that have been considered by the police and others who have dived deep into the case. And although nothing concrete has come out of these investigations, it's still absolutely worth mentioning them. First and foremost was the convicted serial killer Robin Ligas, who police seriously looked at in 2011. During the mid-1990s, Ligas is known to have killed at least 3 people in Shropshire, a county which borders Wales. And strangely, one of his victims, a man named Trevor Bradley, was, like Trevaline, an antiques dealer. This detail, plus his relative proximity to the area in which she vanished, led to this link. But ultimately, the authorities couldn't find any definitive evidence to tie Ligas to Trevaline. I must say that I understand why this angle would have made an appealing theory. Apparently, Ligas used to boast to his fellow inmates about being a natural-born killer. And I think it's fair to say that if he had had the opportunity to abduct a person and subsequently take their life, he would probably have taken it. But at the end of the day, there are aspects of his MO that simply don't fit with this case, such as the fact that his male victims' bodies were just left to be discovered, and Trevaline has never been found. So most people seem doubtful that Ligas was responsible here. Next is a name I've mentioned a couple of times before on the podcast, particularly in our episode about the Angel of the Meadow murder, and that is Christopher Halliwell. Halliwell is a convicted murderer. He was found guilty of killing 2 young women in the town of Swindon. If you're a close follower of UK true crime cases, you may well be familiar with his name, as there are relatively frequent new allegations that come up about his possible involvement in other unsolved cases. But for legal reasons, as he is still alive, I have to make it clear that these are just allegations. One of the reasons he was raised as a potential person of interest in Trevaline's case is because by the time she vanished in 1990, he had served time in prison for burglary and for selling stolen antiques. Plus, he was thought to have some connections to North Wales. So the theory was that, although it was a bit of a stretch, that there could be some kind of link there. However, to date, nothing has come of this line of inquiry. And then, of course, we have the people outlined in the original Crime Watch programme who were seen with Trevaline in the days before she disappeared, particularly the man from the 15th of June. However, in the episode of In the Footsteps of Killers, a witness named Linda comes forward with a persuasive theory that the description of the man from this date matched closely with Trevaline's other brother, Philip. She knew this because she had actually started a relationship with Philip at that time, and as she speaks about it, her account feels very compelling. Interestingly, as well as speaking about the identity of this previously unknown figure, Linda also offered up a few thoughts about Trevaline's husband. She mentioned that the Evans' marriage was not a happy one, and that Richard wasn't very well liked. She also described how after Trevaline vanished, Richard started to move carpets and pieces of furniture out of their home, which she found very odd. Why, if he thought that there was a chance she could return to the house, would he be turning it upside down? And I suppose, leading on from this, I wanted to explore something that was noted in the Crime Watch reconstruction that really stuck with me. Remember Doreen Dolson, the shopkeeper Trevaline purchased milk from on the morning of the 16th 16th of June? Well, in her interview, she made a point of mentioning that whilst Trevaline was paying for the milk, she first pulled a wad of notes out of her purse so that she could reach the loose coins underneath. Doreen states in the programme, "I was going to say to her, watch your money," but confirmed that she avoided making the comments as she didn't want to appear rude. This then brought me back to something else that was mentioned in the Footsteps of Killers, which is that apparently information the show gathered from North Wales Police showed that Trevaline had inherited £10,000 from an extramarital partner of hers who had passed away. But that's not all. In the episode, David Wilson then told Amelia Fox that his police contact also revealed another key detail, that Richard Sr. had arrived back in Llangollen much earlier than previously believed on the day of his wife's disappearance, at around 2:30 p.m. Although this information is intriguing, again it's just circumstantial, and there's no actual evidence to suggest that the reasons behind this were sinister. It's yet another frustrating puzzle piece that could well fit into the wider jigsaw, or not, but without us having all of the other pieces, it's just impossible to create a full picture of what any of this could really mean. I would definitely recommend checking out the In the Footsteps of Killers episode after you finish listening to the podcast today. There are a few more potentially interesting nuggets of information in there, as well as a deeper look into the Christopher Halliwell theory too. It's not something I'm particularly convinced of, I must say, but when a case has been unsolved for this long, I think every angle is worth exploring. For now, I wanted to finish off this episode with my own thoughts, based on everything I've read and watched about Trevaline's story. I completely agree with her brother Leonard in that I believe she was taken or lured somewhere against her will. I don't think she voluntarily left her shop that day with the intention of starting a new life. The point has been raised a few times that if she had left and had made a fresh start, perhaps in another country, surely someone would have heard something from her over the past 3.5 decades. Her only son passed away tragically in 1999, and I can't imagine for a moment that she wouldn't have resurfaced when this happened if she had been alive. I also think that there might be more to the money side of things, as we know that money is so often a major factor in serious crimes, and that recent £10,000 inheritance could have provided motive. Was someone blackmailing her? Is that why she had that wad of cash in her purse the morning she disappeared? Those are two questions I've been pondering throughout my research. But then again, you have to think about the fact that she was an antiques dealer. Having sums of cash on her person was probably not that unusual. As for the plaques and connection to Rithlan Golf Club, I'm desperate to know exactly what the information was that Andy and Lee Sutton received, and who the tip-off came from. The fact they feel so strongly about it, and that they described seeing human remains that then vanished, is so odd. What would they have to gain by lying? And isn't it strange that the golf club is in the very same town as the holiday cottage? I mean, it's clear to see why people are still so intrigued by this mystery, and I really do hope that it can be solved. Cases like this one often make me sad when so much time has passed that many of those who knew Trevaline, including virtually all of her close family members, have now passed away without getting any answers. That's why it's important to me to remember these stories, as no matter how long ago an incident happened, a definitive answer will always be better than no answer at all. Oh, I tell you, this case really got inside my head. It's another one that's going to keep me up at night for a long time to come, I can already tell. If by some miracle you've listened to this episode today and have any information you think could be helpful to the police, perhaps you're from North Wales or were living around the area at the time, then I will be including a link in the show notes which contains the force's contact information. As always, I would love to know your thoughts and theories about this story, and I'll be giving you a refresher about all of the ways that you can get in touch shortly. But for now, it's time for a feature I have really missed. Here's our outro segment, Weird Media. If you're anything like me, during the cold winter months, you might like to get cozy with a historical twist on your entertainment of choice. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love a period drama all year round, but there's something about the early, dark nights that really make me gravitate towards watching films and TV shows that are set in the past, with bonus points if they're based on real events too. And that leads me to today's weird media recommendation, which is the fantastic Wolf Hall. If you're not familiar with it, it's a BBC series that follows part of Henry VIII's reign, told via the perspective of one of his right-hand men, Thomas Cromwell. It is largely dramatised and partially fictionalised, like the novels it's based on, but it's just so well done. As far as I'm concerned, the majority of Henry's later life was one continuous strange but true story, especially when it came to his behaviour, but it's an absolutely fascinating watch nonetheless. So back in 2015, the first series of Wolf Hall aired, and for some reason it totally passed me by, which is very odd because I'm a huge Tudor history nerd, and it's the kind of thing I would have watched in a heartbeat had I realised what it was about. But when I heard that it was coming back for a second series almost a decade later, I knew I had to catch up on it ahead of the premiere. So I went back and watched series 1, and then I recently watched each new episode live as it aired on Sunday evenings, and I was completely hooked. The casting is incredible. Mark Rylance plays Thomas Cromwell, Damian Lewis is Henry, the incredible Jonathan Pryce plays Cardinal Wolsey. The list goes on, there is no shortage of talent in the cast. I think sometimes when it comes to Henry VIII as a historical figure, he's so infamous that I think it can be easy to forget that he was a complete tyrant. But I think Wolf Hall does a decent job at highlighting Henry's many flaws instead of glorifying him, not least because he's not the main character in the show. It's a brilliant programme, well worth getting stuck into. And if you do, I hope you also enjoy the multiple Google rabbit holes you'll probably find yourself going down after each episode. Right, time for some quick Saw shout-outs. Of course, we had the 2 television episodes I mentioned multiple times, the Crime Watch segment from September 1990 and the In the Footsteps of Killers episode from 2023. There were 3 fantastic articles from North Wales Live, 2 by Kelly Williams, both from May 2019, and 1 by Gareth Hughes and Kelly Williams from January 2021. We then had 2 more brilliant pieces from Wales Online too. The first was by Darren Devine from February 2015, and the second was by Kathy Owen from May 2022. As I promised at the start, just a quick note about our schedule going forward. I've had to pause our Weird Fix mini episodes for the time being. I absolutely love doing them, but I'm just trying to figure out the most sustainable way to keep the podcast going. So for now, there will be a new full episode every 2 weeks. But my true and genuine hope is that I'll be able to bring back weekly content as soon as I can. I massively appreciate you all sticking around and for your lovely messages during this break. And I'm really excited that the podcast is back. So here's to many more strange but true stories for 2025. Okay, that said, here are all of the ways that you can get in touch. On Instagram and also Threads, just look up at Things Get Weird Podcast. On TikTok, we are at Things Are About to Get Weird. And on Facebook, you can find us by searching for the podcast name. Over on there, you'll find our main page and our private discussion group too. Our email address is thingsgetweirdpodcast@gmail.com. And if you've enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate a quick rating or review wherever you're listening. I can't tell you how helpful they are for the show. Also, don't forget about that comments function if you're listening on Spotify. It's a really great way to share your theories and ideas. Thank you all so much once again for listening today, and I'll speak to you all again very soon. So until next time, take care of yourself and others and keep it weird, but the good kind of weird.